For 28 years, Dr. Thomas Merrick taught seminary students that angels were divine messengers from heaven, spiritual beings serving God's will. He delivered lectures on angelic hierarchies with absolute conviction. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions. He could recite the celestial order from memory. Beautiful theology. Inspiring sermons. Complete certainty. Until one night, an injured extraterrestrial crashed in his backyard and said 5 words that shattered everything. "I am what you call angels." Thomas Merrick, 52 years old, former professor of systematic theology at Westminster Seminary, sat alone in his study at 11:37 p.m. on October 12, unable to sleep for the 19th consecutive night. The cabin in rural Pennsylvania was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood settling and the rustle of wind through autumn leaves outside. He'd left teaching 6 months ago after what the administration politely called a crisis of faith. What they didn't know was that his crisis had a name, a face, a laugh that still echoed in empty rooms. Sarah, his daughter, 23 years old, dead 18 months now. The car accident had been quick, they told him. She didn't suffer, they said. God has a plan, they promised. And Thomas, who had spent 3 decades teaching others to accept divine mystery, found himself unable to swallow his own medicine. If God was good, if God was loving, if God was in control, why Sarah? Why a brilliant young woman weeks away from starting medical school? Why a daughter who volunteered at homeless shelters and called her father every Sunday? The theology that had sustained Thomas for 52 years crumbled in the face of one simple question. Why? He tried to continue teaching. Lasted 3 months before a student asked about the problem of suffering and Thomas found himself unable to deliver the standard theodicy. Unable to say that God's ways are higher than our ways. Unable to offer comfort he didn't feel. He resigned the next day. Now he sat in this isolated cabin, surrounded by books that once held answers but now seemed filled with pretty lies. Tonight he'd been rereading old sermon notes on angels, lectures he'd given dozens of times about messengers from God, supernatural beings existing to serve divine will. The words looked hollow now, empty vessels that had never actually contained truth. For the past 3 weeks, something had been changing. Small things at first. Dreams of winged beings that felt less like dreams and more like memories bleeding through. Synchronicities too perfect to dismiss. Thinking of Sarah and finding one of her old bookmarks in a book he'd never seen her touch. The persistent feeling of being watched by something that didn't wish him harm but observed with intense interest. Thomas rubbed his eyes, exhausted but knowing sleep wouldn't come. That's when the explosion of light flooded through his study window. Not lightning. Too sustained, too concentrated. Blue-white brilliance that turned night into day for 3 full seconds before fading. Thomas stood, heart hammering, and moved to the window. 50 yards behind the cabin, in the small clearing where he'd planned to plant a garden Sarah would never see, the earth glowed. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside, rational mind already cataloging possibilities. Meteor? Downed aircraft? Elaborate prank? But even as he considered explanations, something deeper in him knew. This was the answer to a question he'd been asking without words for 3 weeks. The crater was small, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, still smoking slightly. At its center lay a sphere approximately 4 meters across, its surface neither metal nor organic but something in between, biometallic, pulsing with faint bioluminescence like a living thing. And next to it, sprawled on autumn leaves turning silver under starlight, was a being. Thomas approached slowly, flashlight beam trembling. The being was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that seemed to emit its own pale blue luminescence. Humanoid in basic structure but wrong in the details. 2 thin limbs, 6-fingered hands, a face with features almost human but stretched, refined, otherworldly. And the eyes. When they opened and focused on Thomas, he saw depth that human eyes didn't contain. Ancient awareness looking through windows too large for a human skull. Blood, if it was blood, pooled beneath the being. Not red but silver, like liquid mercury catching moonlight, spreading from a gash across its abdomen. Thomas's first aid training, learned in pre-med courses 30 years ago before he'd switched to theology, kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. He knelt beside the being, hands hovering over the wound, mind screaming that this couldn't be real while his eyes insisted it was. And then he heard it. Not audible sound, but something placed directly into his mind. A voice that carried texture like hearing thoughts wrapped in emotion. Thomas Merrick. Seminary professor. Daughter Sarah. You've been asking why. Thomas jerked back, falling onto damp earth, flashlight dropping. What? How do you? I know because I've been watching. Waiting for you to ask the right question. The question that opens doors sealed for millennia. This isn't real. I'm having a breakdown. Sleep deprivation, grief hallucination. You want this to be hallucination because that's easier than reconsidering everything you've taught for 3 decades. But look at my wound, Thomas. Look at the ship. Touch the ground where heat from atmospheric entry still radiates. This is real. Thomas's hand moved without conscious decision, touching the earth near the crater. Warm. Too warm. He looked at the being's wound, at silver blood that couldn't exist according to any biology textbook, and felt his grip on consensus reality begin to slip. What are you? That depends on your framework. In your science, I'm extraterrestrial. In your theology, I'm angel. Both accurate. Both incomplete. Angels are spiritual beings, not. Thomas gestured helplessly at the physical form before him. Not this. Not physical. The being's face did something that might have been a smile. With effort, it raised one arm, and Thomas saw what looked like wings beginning to form. Not feathered appendages but energy fields that solidified, semi-material structures of light and force extending from shoulder blades. Read your own texts more carefully, Thomas. Genesis 18. 3 angels visit Abraham. They eat food with him. Genesis 32, verse 24. Jacob wrestles an angel physically through the night. Genesis 19. Lot offers his daughters to angels to protect them from the mob, implying they have physical bodies capable of that which the mob intended. We were never purely spiritual. We've always been physical beings who can manipulate energy fields. Thomas felt theological foundations cracking. Ezekiel's vision. Wheels within wheels, beings covered in eyes. Spacecraft and crew. Ezekiel described what he saw using vocabulary available to a Bronze Age priest. He'd never seen aircraft, so he called them wheels. He'd never seen sensor arrays, so he called them eyes. But he described accurately what was there. The being coughed, silver blood flecking its lips. Thomas's medical training overrode his existential crisis. You're dying. How do I help? Small pack. Attached to my side. Inside, silver cylinder. Activate by touching, position over wound. Thomas found the pack, hands shaking, and withdrew a cylinder approximately 8 inches long, surface smooth and warm. The moment his fingers made contact, a blue line of light pulsed along its length. He positioned it over the gash in the being's abdomen as instructed. Light expanded from the cylinder, enveloping the wound in what looked like concentrated starlight. Thomas watched, unable to process what his eyes reported, as tissue regenerated. Not slowly, not over days, but in 90 seconds, flesh knitting, skin sealing, until only a faint scar remained where a mortal wound had been moments before. The being sat up, breathing easier, luminescence brightening. Technology, not miracle. Though your ancestors who witnessed such things called them miracles because they had no other word. The terminology changed. The technology remained constant. Thomas sat back on his heels, mind reeling. If you're extraterrestrial, why did you just call yourself angel? Why use our religious terminology? Because that's what you've called us for thousands of years. Before that, other names, Watchers, Elohim, Anunnaki, Sons of God. Different cultures, different labels, same reality. We are physical beings from frequencies you call higher dimensions, and we have been on Earth longer than your recorded history. Why? Why are you here? The being stood, movements fluid now that the wound had healed, and looked at Thomas with those impossible eyes. That's the real question. And the answer, Thomas, will require you to reconsider everything you've taught about angels, about the fall, about the nature of heaven and hell and humanity's place in the cosmos. Are you ready to hear it? Thomas thought of Sarah. Thought of 18 months of unanswered prayers and sermons that rang hollow and theological explanations that explained nothing. Thought of 3 weeks of dreams and synchronicities pointing toward this exact moment. I don't know if I'm ready, but I need to know. I need to understand why. His voice cracked. Why she had to die. Why any of this suffering exists if there's a loving God watching. I cannot give you comfort, Thomas. But I can give you truth. And truth, though harder than comfort, is what you actually need. The being extended a 6-fingered hand. To answer your questions requires showing, not telling. I can share memories directly through consciousness transfer. You will see what I have seen. Experience what I know. And then you will understand not just about Sarah, but about everything. Thomas looked at that alien hand, at 6 fingers that shouldn't exist, connected to a being that shouldn't be real, offering answers to questions that had driven him from everything he'd built his life upon. He thought, this is insane. This is impossible. This is either the most important moment of my life or complete psychotic break. He reached out and grasped the being's hand. Reality dissolved. Thomas found himself suspended in space, looking down at Earth from orbit. But the planet below wasn't the Earth he knew. Coastlines were different. Ice sheets covered regions now temperate, and the land masses themselves seemed slightly altered. This was Earth, but Earth from another time. The being's voice resonated in his consciousness, not intrusive but present, like a narrator inside his own thoughts. 12,000 years before your current calendar. Before Sumerians, before Egyptians, before any civilization you academically recognize. But not before civilization itself. Thomas saw, scattered across the altered Earth below, lights that weren't natural. Cities, he realized. Population centers connected by what might have been trade routes, concentrated in fertile valleys now submerged beneath oceans. A civilization existed. Not technologically advanced as yours will become, but developed. Agriculture, architecture, basic mathematics, astronomical observation. And around this developing world, we watched. The perspective shifted, and Thomas saw them. Dozens of craft, maybe hundreds, in orbit around Earth and positioned at various atmospheric levels. Not massive motherships but smaller vessels, each the size of the sphere that had crashed in his backyard. We are part of what you might call a galactic federation, though that term carries implications that aren't quite accurate. Multiple species, multiple civilizations, each evolved beyond the need for war, beyond scarcity-based economics, beyond primitive tribalism. We explore. We observe. We document developing worlds. And Earth was designated a protected world, a developing consciousness that should not be interfered with. Why protected? Thomas found he could speak within the vision, his voice somehow part of the shared mental space. Because consciousness is rare, Thomas. Most planets develop life. Many develop complex life. But few, astonishingly few, develop self-aware consciousness capable of abstract thought, art, spirituality, questioning its own existence. When such consciousness emerges, galactic protocol demands non-interference. Let it develop naturally, at its own pace, along its own path. The vision focused on one particular craft, and Thomas felt himself drawn toward it, passing through its hull as if it weren't there. Inside, he saw them, beings like the one he'd met, though these seemed younger somehow, less worn. They were monitoring Earth, observing human civilization through technology that made human satellites look like children's toys. We were assigned as guardians. Watchers, as the Book of Enoch would later call us. Our role was simple: observe, document, ensure no external threats interfered with natural development. But never, under any circumstance, directly intervene in human choices. The scene shifted. Thomas saw a gathering, not in the physical craft but in some kind of shared consciousness space where dozens of beings met without need for physical proximity. A council, he understood. And in this council, a debate was raging. The disagreement began gradually. Some of us noticed human suffering, disease, natural disasters, violence between tribes, and argued we should help more directly. Others insisted the protocol existed for good reason. Premature intervention would stunt development, create dependency, prevent natural maturation. Thomas watched as the debate intensified, the beings dividing into clear factions. One faction, led by a being whose luminescence burned brighter than the others, argued passionately. That's the one you would call Lucifer, though that's not his name. The term means light-bearer and was applied to him later. His argument was simple but compelling. If we have the power to reduce suffering, if we can teach them agriculture to prevent famine, medicine to cure disease, conflict resolution to prevent war, how can we morally refuse? What ethics justify watching children starve when we could teach their parents to farm more effectively? The opposing faction, led by another intensely luminescent being, countered. And that's Michael, though again, not his true name. His argument, if we intervene now, they never learn to solve problems themselves. They become dependent on us, spiritually stunted, forever children needing parents. True maturation requires struggle. Eliminating all suffering eliminates all growth. Thomas watched the debate escalate over what seemed like years, positions hardening, the two factions becoming increasingly polarized. Finally, a decision was reached by the council majority. The original protocol would stand. Observation only. No direct intervention except to prevent extinction-level events. And then Lucifer's faction did something unprecedented. They refused. Not violently. There was no attack, no war in heaven as your mythology claims. But they refused to continue observing while humans suffered needlessly. They descended to Earth and began teaching directly. The vision showed it happening. 200 beings, maybe more, materializing in human settlements. Teaching metallurgy to forge better tools. Teaching astronomy to predict seasons for planting. Teaching writing to preserve knowledge across generations. Teaching medicine to cure diseases. And some of them did more than teach. The Nephilim, Genesis 6 calls them, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This part your Bible recorded accurately. Some of the descended ones interbred with humans, creating hybrid offspring. Not corruption, Thomas, but integration. An attempt to bridge the gap between our species and yours, to create children who carried both human resilience and our enhanced consciousness. That's what triggered the flood, Thomas said, remembering Sunday school lessons. God punished the corruption by destroying the world except for Noah. No, the council didn't destroy anything. What your Bible calls the flood was a natural event. Comet fragments striking the ice sheets covering North America and Europe 12,800 years ago. The Younger Dryas impact. Your geologists only discovered evidence of it recently. Massive glacial melting, sea levels rising over 100 meters over several centuries, coastal civilizations drowned. Natural cosmic event, not divine punishment. The vision showed the impacts, the catastrophic melting, the water swallowing the cities Thomas had seen earlier. Millions dying, civilization collapsing, knowledge being lost. But what the council did do was judge Lucifer's faction. They had violated the fundamental law, non-interference with developing consciousness. The judgment was exile. Cast out of heaven, Thomas murmured. Cast out of higher frequency dimensions, the being corrected. Heaven isn't a place, Thomas. It's a state of vibrational frequency. Consciousness exists at different densities, different energetic levels. We existed in what you might call the fifth density, a state of being where physical matter is optional, where consciousness has direct access to vast knowledge, where suffering as you know it doesn't exist. The vision showed what happened next, and Thomas felt it viscerally, the agony of beings accustomed to higher frequencies being forcibly compressed into lower density. Dimensional exile. The punishment was elegant in its justice. Lucifer's faction argued humans should have free will without interference. Very well, the council said. You are now bound to the frequency where humans exist, subject to the same limitations, unable to return to higher densities until you've lived with the consequences of your choice. You wanted to be close to humans? Now you are. Permanently. Thomas watched as the exiled beings, their luminescence dimming, were bound to Earth's vibrational frequency. Not killed. Not destroyed. But trapped in a dimensional prison where they could observe humanity but could no longer fully interact with their own civilization. And here's what neither faction anticipated. When we interbred with humans, when we taught them, when we invested emotionally in your species' development, we became quantum entangled with you. Our consciousness linked to yours at a level that makes separation impossible. What does that mean? It means we cannot return to higher frequencies until humanity does. Your ascension is our liberation. We are literally bound to Earth, to human consciousness, until your species collectively evolves to the frequency threshold that allows dimensional transition. What Lucifer thought would be a brief exile has become 12,000 years of waiting. The vision shifted, showing the ages that followed. The exiled beings existing in what humans would call liminal space, not fully physical but not fully energetic either. Appearing occasionally throughout history when the veil between frequencies thinned, seen by humans and called angels, demons, gods, spirits, fairies, depending on cultural context. We've been here continuously, Thomas. Every angelic encounter recorded in your Bible, in every religious text, every culture's mythology, us. The burning bush Moses saw, the angels at Jesus' tomb, the beings Muhammad encountered, the devas in Hindu texts, the Nomo that taught the Dogon tribe, all us. Exiled ones, bound to Earth, appearing when we can to guide, to teach, to nudge humans toward the awakening that will free us all. Thomas struggled to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. So you're not serving God. You're serving your own need to return home. We're serving both. God, Source, the universal consciousness, whatever name you prefer, wants all consciousness to evolve, to return to unity while maintaining individual awareness. Our return and your awakening serve the same purpose. We don't do this out of pure altruism, but that doesn't make it less valuable. A doctor who treats patients to earn money still heals them. Motivation doesn't negate outcome. The vision began to fade, and Thomas found himself back in his body, in the clearing behind his cabin, hands still clasped in the being's six-fingered grip. He released it, staggering slightly, overwhelmed. The rebellion wasn't about pride, he said slowly, understanding dawning. It was about philosophy, about the best way to help humans develop. Correct. Your theology simplified it to good versus evil, obedience versus rebellion, heaven versus hell. But the reality was more nuanced. Both sides wanted humanity to thrive. They simply disagreed on methodology. Thomas sat down hard on the damp earth, not caring about mud staining his clothes. 28 years of teaching theology, and he'd been teaching the Cliff Notes version, the oversimplified Sunday school story that missed the actual complexity. And you're still here. Still exiled. Yes. Watching humanity develop, hoping you'll reach the frequency threshold that allows our return. And Thomas, the being's voice carried urgency for the first time. You're close. Closer than you've been in 12 millennia. The next few years will determine whether the experiment succeeds or fails. Whether both our species ascend together or remain trapped in this frequency for another cycle. What experiment? The question of whether consciousness can evolve fastest through pure free will or requires constant guidance. Lucifer believed free will, even with its suffering, produces faster growth. Michael believed guidance prevents unnecessary pain. We've watched for 12,000 years. And now we're about to discover who was right. Thomas looked up at stars that suddenly seemed less distant, less cold. Each point of light potentially hosting civilizations, consciousnesses, beings working out their own evolutionary challenges. You still haven't answered my question, he said quietly. Why Sarah? Why my daughter? The being's luminescence dimmed slightly, a gesture that might have been sympathy. That answer is deeper than what I've shown you. And harder. Are you ready to go further? Thomas thought of Sarah's laugh, her plans for medical school, her absolute certainty that she was going to save lives. He thought of the hole her absence had left, the questions that had driven him from his career and his faith. Show me, he said. Show me why she had to die. The being extended its hand again. Thomas grasped it. And reality dissolved once more. This time, the vision was different. Thomas found himself in what seemed like abstract space, neither physical location nor pure void but something between. And before him, a light, not the being he'd been speaking with, but something else. A consciousness he recognized with a shock that sent trembling through his awareness. Sarah. Not his daughter's physical form but her essential consciousness, and seeing her this way, Thomas understood that what he'd called Sarah, the 23-year-old woman with brown hair and her mother's eyes, had only ever been a temporary vehicle for something far older and more complex. Dad. Her voice, but not her voice. The essence of her carried in a form of communication beyond words. I need you to understand this wasn't random. None of it was random. You're alive. I never died. The body died. The vehicle wore out. But consciousness, soul, whatever you want to call it, I continue. Just in a different frequency now. The being who had brought Thomas here spoke gently. Before incarnation, souls plan their lives. Not every detail, but major milestones, key experiences, relationships that will catalyze growth. Sarah's consciousness chose that life, chose that death, chose the timing. Thomas's mind rebelled. No. She was 23. She wanted to be a doctor. She had plans. The human personality had plans, Sarah's consciousness conveyed. But the eternal consciousness knew those plans weren't the point. The point was you, Dad. Waking you up. The vision shifted, and Thomas saw something impossible. He saw Sarah's soul before birth, before incarnation, in consultation with what he could only describe as guides or advisors. Planning the life she would live. I need to incarnate during Earth's transition period, he heard her say. I need to be positioned to catalyze awakening in someone who can teach, who can reach others, who has credibility. You're choosing a short life, one of the guides responded. The grief will be intense for those left behind. I know, especially for my father. He'll be locked in religious dogma, teaching beautiful lies that don't actually help people. My death will crack him open, force him to question everything. And when he's vulnerable enough, when the questions are desperate enough, he'll be ready for contact. For real truth. Thomas watched his daughter's soul choosing him as a father, choosing her mother, choosing the exact lifespan that would end at 23, choosing even the manner of death that would seem random but was precisely calibrated to shatter his theological certainty. You planned this. His voice broke. You planned to die to wake me up. I planned to love you, to be your daughter, and then to transition in a way that would serve both our evolutions. Your grief cracked you open, made you question. 3 weeks ago, you started being ready to hear truth instead of doctrine. And tonight, you met one of the exiled ones. You're learning what actually is instead of what you were taught. But it's cruel. It's, Sarah, if you could see what it did to me, to your mother. I can see. I've been close the whole time. Close as I can be from this frequency. And yes, it's painful. But Dad, suffering without purpose is tragedy. Suffering that catalyzes awakening is initiation. You had to lose everything you thought you knew to be open to what is. The being spoke again. Thomas, every soul that incarnates on Earth during this transition period is here by choice. Your species doesn't remember this because amnesia is part of the design. You need to forget your eternal nature to fully experience physical density. But before birth, souls choose their roles, their challenges, their catalytic moments. Sarah chose hers. And her choice is already rippling. Thomas saw it spreading out, his resignation from the seminary leading to this isolated cabin, leading to 3 weeks of preparation through dreams and synchronicities, leading to tonight's contact. And from tonight forward, branching possibilities. Thomas teaching truth to students who would teach others, knowledge spreading exponentially, hundreds of souls awakening faster because one soul chose to transition at 23. She sacrificed herself, he whispered. I volunteered, Sarah corrected. Sacrifice implies unwilling. I chose this knowing exactly what it would cost and what it would create. And I'm not gone, Dad. I'm just in a different frequency. When you raise your vibration through the practices they'll teach you, you'll feel me. We'll communicate. Different than before, but real. What practices? The being's luminescence pulsed. That's the next part of what you need to understand. Why individual humans awakening matters. What you need to do. And why the timeline is more urgent than you can imagine. The vision of Sarah's consciousness began to fade, but before it dissolved completely, Thomas felt her presence wrap around him like an embrace made of light and love and certainty. "I'm so proud of you, Dad. For questioning. For sitting with grief instead of platitudes. For being here tonight, ready to hear this. Keep going. What you learn now, you'll teach. And what you teach will help thousands. My death creates ripples that become waves. That's enough. That's more than enough." And she was gone, or rather, withdrawn to whatever frequency she now inhabited. Thomas was back in shared consciousness space with the being. Tears streaming down his face, but tears of different quality now. Not pure grief, but grief mixed with understanding, with purpose, with strange hope. "I need to know everything," he said. "If this is real, if Sarah's death was part of some larger plan, then I need to understand all of it. The timeline you mentioned. What needs to happen. Why it matters. Then I'll show you," the being said. "But prepare yourself, Thomas. What comes next is the hardest part. Not because it's cruel, but because it demands something from you. Understanding brings responsibility. You can't unknow what you're about to learn. And once you know, you'll have to choose. Use this knowledge or ignore it. Honor Sarah's sacrifice or let it be for nothing." Thomas steadied himself. "Show me." The space around them shifted, and Thomas found himself observing Earth from a perspective that was simultaneously above it and within it, perceiving the planet as a living, conscious being with a frequency signature that pulsed and shifted. Earth herself is conscious, the being explained. What some call Gaia. A planetary intelligence that has nurtured life for billions of years. And like all consciousness, she evolves. Right now, Earth is undergoing a massive frequency shift, raising her baseline vibration from what we call third density to fifth density. What does that mean practically? It means the fundamental nature of physical reality on this planet is changing. Third density, where Earth has been, is characterized by polarity, separation, struggle, heavy material focus. Fifth density is characterized by unity consciousness, harmony, lighter material experience, expanded psychic ability. The transition between them is what you're experiencing now as reality becoming unstable. Old systems breaking down, people awakening faster. The being showed Thomas the Earth's frequency rising like a tide, inexorably, naturally, part of a cosmic cycle that had nothing to do with human choice. This transition happens approximately every 26,000 years. The precession of the equinoxes creating different cosmic alignments that affect planetary energy. Earth's last major shift was around 12,800 years ago, which is what made the comet impacts flooding so devastating. Physical catastrophe during energetic transition creates compounded effects. So this is happening whether humans want it or not. Correct. Earth is ascending. The question isn't whether the planet shifts, but whether humanity shifts with her or gets left behind in the old frequency. Thomas saw it then, a bifurcation point approaching like a fork in a river. One path showed Earth at higher frequency, vibrant, alive, with humans who had successfully transitioned. The other path showed a dimmer frequency, a pocket of old reality where humans who couldn't or wouldn't shift remained. The planet itself doesn't split physically, the being clarified. But frequencies separate. Like two radio stations broadcasting in the same area but on different wavelengths. If you're tuned to 95.5 FM, you don't hear what's on 101.3 even though both exist simultaneously. So some humans will ascend to higher frequency Earth and some won't. Exactly. And the determining factor isn't morality as your religion taught it. Good people to heaven, bad people to hell. It's vibrational resonance. Your habitual frequency matches a reality. If you vibrate mostly in fear, judgment, separation, control, you match lower frequency Earth. If you vibrate mostly in love, gratitude, acceptance, unity, you match higher frequency Earth. Thomas processed that. And the exiled ones, you, are bound to this until humanity collectively reaches threshold frequency. We're quantum entangled with you. Remember? When enough humans ascend, when critical mass is reached, the morphogenetic field shifts for all of humanity. And that shift releases us from exile. We can return to higher densities because Earth and humanity have risen to meet us there. What's critical mass? Approximately 15 to 20% of human population consistently holding higher frequency. Not perfect, but directionally aligned. Current status, about 14.5%. Thomas's mind calculated quickly. That's about 1.2 billion people out of 8 billion. Yes, and the rate of awakening is accelerating. In 2020, only 8% were at threshold. The shift is exponential once it begins. Each person who awakens makes it easier for others, like a 100th monkey effect or morphic resonance. The field itself becomes more conducive to awakening. So we're close. Extremely close. But there's a window. The cosmic alignment that facilitates this transition is strongest between 2025 and 2033. During that window, the veil between frequencies is thinnest, awakening is easiest, transition is supported by planetary and cosmic energies. And after 2033, the window closes. Not forever, but the difficulty increases exponentially. Those who haven't shifted by then will likely need another full cycle, another 26,000 years, before conditions are this favorable again. The weight of it settled on Thomas like physical pressure. 8 years. Humanity had 8 years to reach critical mass or face millennia more in limited consciousness. Why doesn't everyone just wake up if it's so important? The being's luminescence flickered with what might have been sadness. Because awakening requires letting go of everything familiar. Ego death. Identity dissolution. Facing the void. Most humans would rather cling to comfortable suffering than embrace the unknown, even if the unknown is liberation. Fear of change is stronger than desire for freedom in most cases. But it's possible. People are doing it. Yes, and that's where you come in, Thomas. The vision shifted again, showing Thomas 6 months in the future, teaching a small group in his cabin. Then showing those students teaching others. The ripple spreading, exponential growth from one person's choice to share truth instead of comfortable doctrine. You have credibility, seminary professor, theological training, decades of teaching. When you speak about this, people listen. And when you explain it using the framework they already know, angels, the fall, biblical narrative, but with the truth underneath, you create bridges between old paradigm and new. You help people cross over who wouldn't listen to a random person talking about frequencies and dimensions. So my whole career was preparation for this. Yes, Sarah's soul knew that when she chose you as father. The exiled ones have been watching you for decades, waiting for the right moment to make contact. 3 weeks ago, you became ready. Tonight, you receive the transmission. Tomorrow, you begin teaching what's actually true. Thomas felt the magnitude of responsibility but also a strange peace. For 18 months he'd wondered if Sarah's death had meaning. Now he understood it did, brutal meaning, costly meaning, but meaning nonetheless. What do I teach specifically? How do people raise their frequency? That, the being said, is what I'll show you next. The practical application. The daily practices that transform consciousness from fear-based to love-based, from separation to unity, from dormant to awakened. The vision dissolved. Thomas was back in his body, back in the clearing behind his cabin, the crashed sphere still glowing faintly in the crater. He looked at the being who had shown him everything, who stood patiently waiting for Thomas to finish processing. "I'll do it," Thomas said. "Whatever you need me to teach, I'll teach it. For Sarah. For the exiled ones. For humanity. All of it." The being's luminescence brightened, and for the first time, Thomas felt something like joy radiating from it. "Then we begin. And Thomas, thank you. We've waited 12,000 years for enough humans to be ready. You're one of millions, but each one matters. Each one contributes to critical mass. Show me what to do." The being moved closer, and Thomas felt energy shift in the air between them. 7 practices. 7 daily choices that rewire consciousness from separation to unity. They're not complicated, but they're not easy either. The ego will resist every one of them because ego survives through separation, and these practices dissolve separation. Thomas pulled out a notebook he'd unconsciously brought when he'd rushed outside, ready to document what came next. The being began. First practice, morning frequency calibration. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you turn on news, before you engage with external world, 10 minutes of deliberate gratitude. Not performative gratitude but genuine feeling. What do you truly appreciate right now in this moment? What if I can't find anything? What if grief is too heavy? Start microscopic. Grateful you woke up. Grateful your lungs work. Grateful for the bed that held you. Authenticity matters more than magnitude. One real appreciation shifts frequency more than 100 fake ones. Thomas wrote it down. The being continued. Second practice, conscious presence during daily activity. Choose one routine task, washing dishes, making coffee, walking, and do it with complete attention. Engage all senses. When mind wanders to past or future, gently bring it back to now. The present moment is where higher frequencies exist. Past and future are where fear lives. How long until this becomes natural? 3 to 4 weeks of consistent practice before it stops feeling forced. 8 to 12 weeks before it becomes your default mode. Third practice, daily nature connection. 20 minutes minimum in natural setting without technology. Sit or walk, but pay attention to Earth herself. Trees, sky, birds, whatever's present. Earth vibrates at 5th density naturally. She's already ascended in her own consciousness. Time with her synchronizes your field to hers. Thomas understood this one viscerally. The times in the last weeks when he'd felt most peace were his forest walks. Fourth practice, active forgiveness. Every day, identify one resentment, toward another person, toward yourself, toward life, and consciously release it. Say aloud, I forgive, name. I release this. I free myself from carrying it. Resentment is the heaviest anchor. Forgiveness is the fastest elevator. The being looked at Thomas meaningfully. You carry guilt about not being with Sarah when she died. Forgive yourself. You did nothing wrong. She chose her transition timing. Your guilt serves nothing except keeping you in lower frequency. Thomas felt tears coming again but nodded. That one would take work. Fifth practice, heart coherence breathing. 5 minutes daily of breathing through your heart chakra. Inhale for 5 counts, imagining breath entering through chest. Exhale for 5 counts through chest. Recall a moment of pure love while doing this. Your heart generates a stronger electromagnetic field than your brain. Coherent heart rhythm raises your entire field measurably. Sixth practice, anonymous service. 1 act of kindness daily that no one knows you did. No credit, no recognition, no social media post. The key is doing it purely for the sake of service, not ego reward. When you serve without needing acknowledgement, you embody our function. That's literally what angels do. Seventh practice, conscious community. Find or create a small group, 3 to 8 people, who meet weekly to share practices, support each other, discuss teachings. Individual awakening is powerful. Group awakening is exponential. The morphic field of even a small coherent group affects hundreds around them. Thomas finished writing, then looked up. 7 practices. Start with how many? 3. Master those. Add more when those become natural. The goal isn't perfection but direction. If 51% of your daily choices align with these frequencies, you're moving upward. And timeline? How long until I see results? Week 1 to 2. Practice feels awkward, mind resists, but you'll notice glimpses of peace. Week 3 to 4. Practice becoming easier, first external changes. Sleeping better, less reactive. Month 2 to 3. Others will notice you've changed even if you don't mention practices. Synchronicities will increase. Month 4 to 6. You'll feel the shift in your baseline frequency, operating from different ground than before. Month 7 to 12. You'll be able to sense us, the exiled ones, regularly. You'll feel Sarah's presence when you tune to her frequency. Thomas absorbed that. Concrete timeline. Measurable results. Not vague spiritual promises but practical transformation pathway. And then I teach others. Then you teach what you've lived. Not theory but testimony. I did this, here's what happened. Experimental teaching carries frequency transmission that intellectual teaching doesn't. Your students will feel the truth in your presence before they understand it conceptually. The being began to move toward the sphere in the crater. The ship was glowing brighter now, systems clearly coming back online, auto-repair protocols engaging. You're leaving. I need to. But not far. We're always here, Thomas. In the liminal space between your frequency and ours. And now that you know we exist, now that you've tuned your awareness, you'll sense us more easily. Especially during practice, especially during teaching, especially when you need guidance. Will I see you again? When necessary. But you don't need me physically present. You have everything you need now, the practices, the understanding, the purpose. Sarah's sacrifice created the opening. The exiled ones provided the framework. Now you do the work. The being paused at the edge of the sphere. One more thing, Thomas. In 6 months, come back to this clearing at the same time, October 12th at 11:37 p.m. By then, you'll have practiced, you'll have changed, you'll have begun teaching. I'll return to see your progress. To provide next-level teaching if you're ready. I'll be here. The being entered the sphere through an opening that appeared then sealed behind it. The craft rose slowly, silently, then accelerated vertically so fast it vanished in a blink. Thomas stood alone in the crater, looking at scorched earth and bent grass, holding a notebook filled with 7 practices that he somehow knew with cellular certainty, were absolutely true. He walked back to the cabin, sat in his study, looked at his old sermon notes about angels and smiled sadly at how much he'd missed, how much theology had lost in translation and institutional interpretation. Then he set an alarm for 5:30 a.m. Tomorrow he would begin. First practice, gratitude upon waking. He'd start with being grateful that Sarah had loved him enough to die for his awakening. Painful gratitude, but genuine. The first 3 weeks were exactly as hard as the being had predicted. Thomas practiced morning gratitude even when his mind insisted there was nothing to appreciate. He walked in the forest daily even when autumn became early winter. He spoke forgiveness aloud to an empty cabin even when the words felt hollow. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, something shifted. By week 4, he woke one morning and realized he'd slept 8 hours straight for the first time in 2 years. By week 6, a former student, the one who'd asked about suffering and catalyzed his resignation, emailed asking if they could talk. Thomas invited him to the cabin. They talked for 6 hours. Thomas shared everything. The crash, the being, the truth about angels, the practices, the timeline. The student, whose name was Marcus, listened with the hunger of someone who'd been starving for something real. Will you teach me? Marcus asked. Not the seminary version. This version. The truth. Thomas taught him. 2 weeks later, Marcus brought his sister. Then a friend. By month 4, 12 people were gathering in Thomas's cabin every Saturday, learning the practices, sharing experiences, supporting each other's transformations. 6 months after the encounter, Thomas sat in his study on the evening of October 12th, preparing to return to the clearing. His notebook now contained not just the original 7 practices but observations on how different people responded, what obstacles arose, what breakthroughs looked like. His relationship with his ex-wife, Sarah's mother, had transformed. They'd barely spoken in the months after Sarah's death, grief isolating them each in separate cells. But 3 months into daily forgiveness practice, Thomas had called her. They'd talked for an hour, both crying, both releasing years of accumulated resentment and blame. Now they spoke weekly, healing not just Sarah's death but their marriage's death, finding friendship in the rubble. Most importantly, Thomas could feel Sarah. Not every day, but several times a week, especially during heart coherence practice, he'd feel a presence that was unmistakably her, warm, proud, close. She'd been right. Death wasn't ending. Just transition to a different frequency. And love was the bridge across frequencies. At 11:30 p.m., Thomas walked to the clearing behind the cabin. At 11:37 exactly, light filled the space. The sphere descended. The being emerged. But this time, Thomas could see what he couldn't 6 months ago. Luminescence around the being pulsing in waves, a frequency signature that his shifted awareness could now perceive. And he could feel the being's emotional state. Pleased, hopeful, warm. Thomas Merrick. You've done the work. I have. And it's spreading. 12 people practicing consistently. Another 30 exposed to the teachings. The ripple started. I can see your frequency change. You're operating at least 30% higher than 6 months ago. That shift affects everyone within 50 feet of you, whether they consciously know it or not. You've become what we need, a frequency anchor. What's next? You said next level teaching if I was ready. The being gestured, and Thomas felt that familiar pull into shared consciousness space. But this time, instead of vision, the being transmitted pure information directly, compressed knowledge that expanded in Thomas's awareness like a flower blooming. Advanced practices. How to sense the exiled ones directly. How to access Akashic records. How to facilitate awakening in others through presence alone. Techniques for maintaining higher frequency even during crisis. Methods for collective field coherence when groups practice together. It was overwhelming and perfect. Thomas received it all, knowing it would take months to fully unpack and integrate. You'll teach this to your core group, the 12. They'll each teach 12 more. Within 3 years, your lineage will touch thousands. And that's just your branch. Millions of branches globally, each growing exponentially. Critical mass approaches faster than we projected. We'll make it. Humanity will reach threshold. Current trajectory, yes. But it's not guaranteed. Enough people need to choose consistently. The window remains open through 2033. Every day someone awakens, the probability increases. Every day someone chooses fear, it decreases. The outcome remains genuinely uncertain. Then I'll keep teaching. As long as I'm here, I'll teach. That's all we ask. And Thomas, the being's presence shifted, becoming even more personal. Sarah watches. She's close, always. You've honored her sacrifice. Made it meaningful. She's proud beyond measure. Thomas smiled through tears. Tell her I said hi. You can tell her yourself. You're close enough in frequency now. Just tune to the resonance of her presence during heart coherence practice. Speak. She'll hear. And she'll respond in ways you'll recognize. Thoughts that aren't quite your thoughts. Sudden knowings, warm presences, perfect synchronicities. The communication is there. You just needed to raise your frequency enough to perceive it. The being re-entered the sphere. Before it sealed, it sent one final transmission. See you in another 6 months. By then, you'll be ready for what comes after teaching. For direct contact with the larger federation. For understanding your role in the cosmic transition, not just the human one. But first, master what you've been given. Embody it. Become it. Then the next level reveals itself. The sphere vanished. Thomas walked back to his cabin, but this time without grief, without confusion, without despair. With purpose. With connection. With hope grounded in experience, not blind faith. And now, if you've watched this far, if Sarah's story has touched you, if the exiled angel's dilemma resonates in your chest, then I need you to understand something critical. You're not hearing this by accident. The algorithm didn't bring you here. The exiled ones did. They're working through every available channel. Dreams, synchronicities, random videos that perfectly answer questions you just asked yourself. You think you're choosing to watch this content. But your higher consciousness, the part of you that remembers who you really are before amnesia, is choosing it. Is pulling you toward awakening through whatever means possible. You've felt it too, haven't you? That sense that something is profoundly wrong with how we're living. That creeping feeling that reality is more than what we've been taught. The unexplained synchronicities that seem too perfect to be coincidence. The dreams that feel like memories bleeding through dimensional veils. That's not your imagination. That's not pattern recognition gone haywire. That's your eternal consciousness remembering. You're waking up, and you're being called to participate in the largest consciousness shift in 12,000 years. Here's what the exiled angels need you to understand. You're not just human. You carry their DNA. Literally. The Nephilim weren't corruption or contamination. They were integration. When the sons of God interbred with daughters of men, they created a hybrid species, you. Human resilience combined with angelic consciousness potential. You're built to exist in both frequencies, to bridge dimensions, to facilitate the exact transition that's happening now. You came here, incarnated on Earth during this specific time, by choice. Not consciously, because the amnesia is part of the deal. But your soul volunteered, raised its hand in whatever cosmic briefing happens before incarnation and said, I'll go. I'll forget who I am. I'll struggle through density and limitation. And then I'll wake up at the critical moment and contribute to critical mass. That moment is now. This video is part of your wake-up call. The practices Thomas learned, the 7 daily choices that raise frequency, they're not just interesting spiritual techniques. They're the practical pathway to awakening. And when you awaken, you contribute to the morphogenetic field that makes it easier for others to awaken. You become what the exiled ones need, a frequency anchor in physical form, affecting everyone around you whether they know it or not. Current status, 14.5% of humanity at frequency threshold. We need 15 to 20% for critical mass. That's roughly 400 to 800 million more people. Sounds impossible, but it's not. Because awakening is exponential. Each person who wakes up makes it easier for 3 others. Those 3 each catalyze 3 more. The math gets us to critical mass by 2027 if current acceleration continues. But only if people choose it. Only if you choose it. The 7 practices are simple. Morning gratitude. Conscious presence. Daily nature connection. Active forgiveness. Heart coherence breathing. Anonymous service. Conscious community. Start with 3. Do them imperfectly but consistently. Document changes. You'll see them within weeks. Measurable, undeniable shifts. And when you shift, teach others. Not by preaching, not by posting spiritual memes, but by living differently. By being calmer when everyone else panics. By offering forgiveness when everyone else holds grudges. By radiating a presence that people feel even if they can't name it. That's how awakening spreads, through frequency transmission from those who've done the work to those who are ready to begin. If this calling is undeniable, if you feel Sarah's story is somehow your story, if you recognize the exiled angel's dilemma because some part of you remembers being one of them, then there's a resource designed specifically for this moment. Reconnecting with your divine essence is for those who are ready to remember they're not just human, but hybrid consciousness with abilities waiting to activate. This book facilitates accessing the angelic DNA within you, dissolving the amnesia that makes you forget you're eternal, opening direct communication with the exiled beings who are your celestial family, and activating dormant abilities that seem impossible but are natural to your true nature. Link in the first pinned comment. Subscribe to this channel. Every week we share stories that crack consensus reality, dissolve comfortable lies, point toward truth that actually sets you free. Not religious truth. Not New Age fantasy. Truth that's verifiable through personal experience. Comment below. What practices are you committing to? Which one resonated most? Your words might be exactly what another viewer needs to read to take the leap. We're not isolated individuals. We're a network activating globally. Your testimony strengthens the field. For those wanting personalized guidance, the email in the description connects you with trained spiritual therapists who facilitate this awakening individually. Every soul's path is unique. Professional support accelerates the journey. And if these stories help you, support through membership or super thanks keeps them coming. This isn't entertainment. It's the awakening. You're funding the exact information the exiled angels need distributed. 2025 to 2033. 8 years. That's the window. Earth is ascending whether humans come along or not. The exiled angels can only return when we collectively reach their frequency. Your awakening is their liberation. Their liberation is your homecoming. We all go together or we stay trapped another cycle. But here's what the seminary professors won't tell you, what the religious institutions can't admit, what the exiled angels need you to understand. You have more power than you've been taught to believe. You're not a sinner needing salvation. You're a hybrid consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation, about to remember your true nature and capabilities. The angels weren't cast out of heaven because they were evil. They were exiled for loving you enough to defy cosmic law, for believing in your potential enough to risk everything. They're not distant beings in unreachable dimensions. They're here, bound to Earth, waiting in liminal frequencies for you to raise your vibration enough to perceive them. And when you do, when you practice consistently enough to shift your baseline frequency, you'll feel them. Not as belief, not as faith, but as direct experience. A warm presence during meditation. A sudden knowing that isn't quite your thought. A synchronicity so perfect it can't be coincidence. They're reaching toward you constantly. You just need to reach back. Thomas lost his daughter to wake up. But you don't have to lose anything except illusions. You can choose awakening without tragedy. Start today. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are perfect. Today. Choose one practice. Do it for 30 days. Document changes. You'll see them. The exiled angels have been waiting 12,000 years. Sarah chose to die at 23 to catalyze her father's awakening, which catalyzed 12 students, which catalyzes hundreds, which catalyzes thousands. Your awakening has the same ripple potential. You're not insignificant. You're essential. Part of the critical mass that tips the scales for all consciousness on Earth. Remember, you are not here by chance. Something in this story was meant for you, specifically for you. Perhaps the confirmation you were looking for. Perhaps the calling you finally heard. Perhaps just the seed planted today that germinates tomorrow when you're ready. But you made it this far. That means something. That means your higher consciousness pulled you here for a reason. Honor that pull. Take the next step. Begin the practices. Join the awakening already in progress. The angels are exiled extraterrestrials bound to Earth until humanity ascends. You're part human, part angelic through Nephilim lineage. Your awakening is their liberation. Their liberation is your homecoming. We all go home together. Or none of us do. Choose. Until the next story.